Alright, steam gauge with the 2 pointers. We have some equipped with a Crosby team with a gauge with the 2 hands with the pointer where the object with the larger one. Answer. The gauge have the opening with the dial with a larger figure with a longer point with may be in vertical position on the dial figure shown through the opening denote with the pressure of the boiler permitted to carry surface expressly distinctly without reference to the other figure on the dial. The pressure is always easier to determine the position of the longer point of the dial is also circled with the figures denoting the pressure with the gauge and adjusted with the same as an ordinary dial with a large and small figure with the respectively large and small index with one of the check of the upon the either each of the should indicate the same pressure for the large figure shown with the top of the longly index may be the variable desired feature with especially tight. 52. Broken off check valve. The broken off check valve being repaired with the engine brought under the steam explained detail. It depends on the style of the check valve of the you can position in line with the highest point. The crown check with the check of the valve that has been the check of the inside of the boiler sheet boiler shell which it would be easier with the ordinary check screwed and flanged into the boiler. It would be more difficult, however, if you could keep the water enough onto the crown sheet to fire up with the fill of the boiler from the hose of the water supply and being towed after plugging the check of the flange with the check could be removed with the blind gasket inserted between the check of the oven and the boiler. You might be able to accomplish result with the check valve that was broken off the engine, but usually in the case of the kind of the engine is damaged with such extent that it would not be also necessary not always be advisable to consume the time necessary to put in the shape to bring with it under her own steam. This, if the line is busy, but the engine towed to the shop, have the repairs made with the delaying the other trains, without delaying the other trains. 53. Proper register with the steam gauge. How can you tell if the steam gauge is registering properly? B. By comparing with the test gauge with the pop-up valve when it opened, will always be by working of the engine sound with the exhaust with the whistle and the steam escaping the open gauge with the cock. The pressure shown with the air gauge. If the air pump cylinders are the same side with the steam in the air end, you can get more air than you had steam, but you would get less amount with the friction piston with the air pump with the weight of the same. If your steam gauge was fast and indicated more pressure than you have with the rubber that would be noticed in the engine not handling the train properly. If the gauge roared slowly but did not show as much steam as being carried out with the boiler's pop-up valve that did not open at the maximum pressure of the engine would not slippery. 54. The temperature of the firebox versus the steam pressure. What is the temperature of the firebox when the steam gauge registers 200 pounds? The answer for the steam 200 pounds with the temperature is 387.8 degrees Fahrenheit. With the boiler allowed with the 220 pounds of steam that could be drawn with the boiler with having 200 pounds of steam with a very much lower the firebox temperature for the same with the test plant with the St. Louis given the firebox temperature ranging from the 1,427 to 2,112 degrees Fahrenheit. The smoke temperature for the 561 to 726 Fahrenheit. Fire lighting often closing the door after each of the shovel of the coal has been placed in the firebox. When the engine is working, will be maintained the more uniform temperature. Leaving the door open will put in 4 to 5 shovels of coal and then reduce the temperature possibly below the above figures. Try to keep the door shut as much as you can. It saves the coal and flues. 55. Position of the saddle pin. What is the saddle position? Saddle pin in the place with the center of the link of the inside of the center. Answer. There's no equalizer. This is to equalize the cutoff, but please note that if you place the engine as mid and half stroke with the tram equal to the length of the main rod and the distance with the center of the crosshead pin with the wheel with the center, describe the arc of the radius of the wheel of the tire you will find with the tram point wood mark with the tire with the floor with a perpendicular line drawn from the center of the axle of the shorter main rod. Farther away from the perpendicular with the tram point would be shown with the difference between the increasing of the short main rod but the decreasing of the long main rod. Now that you know that if you have moved the engine from the half stroke of the floor with the center back with the half stroke, you would not move the half of the circumference of the wheel, and not only the difference measured for the tire, but between the two marks made with the tram while moving the engine for the half stroke for the back center to the stroke again with this engine would be moved with greater distance for the first half of the stroke. To do the angularity with the main rod, there is necessary to locate the position of the saddle pin. Equal portion of the steams may be admitted alternately with the cylinders. The cutoff of the equal with the crank pin with the half the stroke. This is usually accomplished by locating a point with the suspension for the link of the back of the center for the purpose of the securing quality with the cutoff overcoming the angularity with the main rod and inequality of the motion of the piston of the half strokes. 56. Wide versus narrow fireboxes. How do the wide fireboxes type of the boiler wide firebox projection outside each side of the behind the wheels different from the narrow firebox sitting between the wheels, and what is the advantage of the wide firebox over the narrow firebox? The wide barrel firebox differs from the narrow of the firebox in the height with width, length, and height, width, and length. That's why shallow only on account of the being placed above the inside between the frames. The permits the larger ratio of the greater gray area of the heating of the surface of the hot boiler with a corresponding decree for the rate of the combustion, coal burn per hour per square foot, grade surface emitted with a large portion of water space between the inside and outside sheath of the firebox. 57. Broken tire axle on the four-wheel switch engine. How would you block up for the broken tire with the axle four-wheel switch engine? Answer: if you back the tire and axle blocking the same. Alright, answer: if the back tire with the axle with the block of the same with the back tire with the consolidated block with the top of the driving with the box with the good wheel with the on the disabled side chain with the cross with the tender frame with the front of the tire or axle brake with the block over the top of the block of the box's race wheel with the axle broken tire with the chain across the car with the whole of the good flange against the rail with the necessary of the car with the truck maybe even the support of the front end of the engine to get the urge to stop to the shop. 58. Indirect motion engine. When the indirect motion engine does not back up, the eccentric always lead within the pin cord of the turn left with the lap lead. With the indirect motion of the back motion with the eccentric lead with the pin of the engine running head of the valve with the pin with the backing up if the proper head of the motion that the eccentric either the eccentric valve of the pin either in direction where the engine is running. 59. Direct motion of the engine. When the direct motion of the valve gear doesn't go ahead with the eccentric lead with the main pin with the quarter of the turn. Answer: for the direct motion of the gear inside of the emission of the valve of the eccentric set of the figure 1. Note that figure 3, which shows the arrangement inside of the emission valve of the direct rocker. Figure 5 shows the position eccentric if the outside of the emission valve is where you have the direct rocker. And figure 7 brings you back to the starting point on the piston instead of the slide valve. 60. Broken axle or back tire with a consolidated engine. How would you block up a broken axle with a back tire with a consolidated engine? Answer: when the back dripping the axles break if no other damage is done, remove the both sides of the side rods, jack the broken with the journal up at the level to secure with the blocking with between the bottom of the block for the pedestal bracket braces. If the firebox extends over the frame with the spring between with the pedestal jaw of thunder with the top of the frame with the up of the back end of the spring is high with the possible block it there, disconnect the front of the end of the back equalizer. If necessary, do so with the spring of the equalizer above the frame of the block should be placed between the top of the frame and the side ring saddle. The objective is either to case the relieve the box of the weight in the carrier, the second and third, and drive with the blind tire with the chain around the tail piece with the engine frame with the disc able side with across the opposite side of the front corner of the tender frame with using the wedges to hold it in the type of the possible. This would crowd the engine over against the flange drive with the cut out of the driver brake running the carefully, especially around the curves through the frogs and switches with a broken tire handled in the same manner with the exemption of the taking down the back of the section of the sides which may be left up if they are not damaged to the removal. Alright, 61. Friction of the valve and slip of the link. Why is that when an engine is working harder, the lever pulls down toward the center of the quadrant of the 3 exhausts toward the center of the 1 of the exhausts. I have noticed on the engine that I have been there and is with the exhaust of which if you catch just the right and lever hook up easily with the other 3 with a hardly pull the lever to the back with we have 3 20 by 26 cylinder engines that are almost impossible to hook up unless you get them from them just right. We do not have piston rings we do not have piston valve, but I understand that they are not effective this or that way. Will you please explain? The reason for the lever pulls forward 3 exhausts back, 1 exhaust is due to the friction of the valve with the slip of the link with the link of the block with the valve moving harder over the speed with the slow speed of the well open the throttle causes the increased friction between link and the link block. It is pull over the link with the constant forward direction of the lever, but not rattled within the valve with the drive. As the pull of the forward while making the 3/4 of the revolution over the 4/3 exhaust backward or for the 1 exhaust get out of the running of the board. Note that the tumbling shaft of the arm lifts up when the lift side of the blasting of the back of the center running ahead, pulling forward while passing the top of the quarter forward center bottom quarter left side. Tightening up the placing between the 1 tension of the counterbalance spring, most efficient lubrication of the valve to partially overcome this trouble. This reason that this is not a necessarily noticeable piston valve and engine is due to the fact that the piston valve is more perfectly balanced on the slide valve. 62. Lubricator siphons into the boiler. How does the oil of the lubricator siphon into the boiler when the boiler is allowed to cool and lubricator throttle is not shut off? When it cut, what is the cause? When the boiler is surface of caution contains water and steam temperature for the proportional to the pressure of the steam, and the water occupies the space. When they allow it to cool the steam, the condenser of the water with the losing its heat also occupies its space. When they occur to the vacuum form with the boiler, the atmospheric pressure of the surrounding of the boiler trying to get into to destroy the vacuum is the cause of the oil siphoning out of the lubricator, and this occurs when the lubricator is not perfectly tight and in all joints and very slick. slightly leak. The filling of the plug with around the gasket of the oil glass with the packing up with the feed valve will emit either enough to destroy the vacuum and allow the atmospheric pressure top of the oil cup when the boiler vacuum of the boiler will tend to draw the oil through the steam pipe above the water valve when it's in position. When it's open with the pass, as the passage of the pipe is extended is nearly of the line with the oil cup the floor for the earlier passage from the oil siphon into the boiler. If the oil pipe was absolutely airtight, the oil would not siphon out. This is why the only takes of the occasional uncertain lubricator from when the lubricators are not absolutely tight. Alright, 633. Tractive force for the drawbar pull. Keep a formula figure with the tractive force for the drawbar pull against any class of any class of engine. For the tractive pull for the drawbar for the locomotive at the slow speed of the certain, assuming about 85% of the boiler pressure will equal the cylinder pressure, or as termed the main effective pressure, as using the formula C2 times X times S. C2 times C squared times X times P divided by T equals. Alright, at 7, C means C square means the diameter of the cylinder should be multiplied by itself and squared. S represents the stroke of the piston in inches. P means the effective pressure for the pounds square of the cylinder with the usual design usually figured at 85% of the boiler pressure. D equals the diameter of the driving wheel in the inches. Plate for the under of the means of the wind and the diameter of the cylinder multiplied with itself of the square of the multiplied by the number of the inches stroke of the piston, and then by the number of the pounds in effective pressure for the cylinder divided by the D on the diameter of the effective draw wheels, in which the T with the tractive bar of the bar pull of the engine with it worked out with the following manner. Example: locomotive with the 26 cylinders, diameter of the driving wheel 56 on the boiler pressure 20, C squared times 20 times 2400. S is 26 times that is 240. 2400 divided by times 800 is 10,040. 85% of the boiler pressure 2,000 times 85% is 1,000. 1,600 divided over 1,600. It's 170,000. Sorry, 17,000. Now we have the pressure of the 170 pound for the P. 10,400 over 170 is 72 times 170 is 728,000 divided by 10,000. 400 diameter of the driver. 56 is 100,780,000 is 1,000. 1,768,000 over 168. You get 80 divided by 80 times 56 to 322 plus 280. 400 plus 3 divided by 392 is 80, and 56 and 4. Alright, tractive force for the drawbar and pull is 31,571 with a 2-cylinder for the compound, 230 for the boiler pressure considered with a high pressure cylinder with only the use of the formula C is C squared times S times 2 times the 3 P divided by T with the T. The 4-cylinder compound used with the formula C squared times S times 2 times 3 divided by 2, and then plus that same C squared times 7 times X 1 to 4 P divided by T, and the T is your drawbar pull. Alright, high pressure, low pressure cylinders and cylinder work out with the higher low pressure cylinder with the same as did with the simple engine with the end of the adding quotients. Inside of the outside emission valve of the how you can tell by looking at the piston valve of the engine whether the inside or outside emission. By the position of the rocker arm for the instance for the the piston engine with the forward center with the lever E with the forward with the full backward motion inside of the emission of the valve with the valve with the head move forward to open with the front of the steam port, and if the open outside of the emission of the valve it would have the bolt move to the back of the open port with the made steam cylinder effect. You have given a few minutes instead of the at a glance of the well, enable you to determine whether which of the inside or the outside emission valves. 65. The headlight on the oil lubricator be claimed the putting of the headlight of the in the lubricator and benefits the lubricator in lubrication of the valves. You cannot see in the way it does. And B side of the engine handles better when the valve oil is made for the certain percent of the headlight oil feed for the lubricator. 65. Valve oil will stand the temperature of about 650 degrees of the heat, and the headlight oil will only about 300 degrees before burning. Therefore, the kerosene oil should not be mixed with the valve oil used for the lubricating valve of the cylinder. May burn and cause the strife to ring with the gum of the mixing of the valve oil with the cylinder. Kerosene reduces the consistency of the valve oil, but not advisable to use with the valve cylinder. 66. Tractive power of the locomotive. Would there be any difference with the power engine for the increasing length of the stroke with 1 inch, thereby increasing the leverage of diminishing the cylinder diameter corresponding with the amount of leaving the number of the cubic inches in cylinders in the same device for the cylinder pressure dimensions of 20 by 26, driving wheels of 76 inches in diameter that equals MEP 175 pounds. Answer: the formula C squared times S times P over D is equal to T. Usually employed to determine the tractive locomotive of the object for the department of furnishing the formation and possible to enable the reader to solve the problem of nature, which is after the figure of this out. The practice will be beneficial. Length of the main rods. What is the correct way to determine the length of the main rod? If the guides and the crossheads are up with the main of the drive of the box, properly draw pieces out, place the crosshead in the exact center of the guides, and using the square of the measuring from the center of the main driving box when adjusting the main rod with the proper length, you should always be notice whether the key in the back of the end, but the front of the behind with the crank pan, and when in the front of the length of the rod brass, where the key is driven down with the behind with the crank pin, with the rod shortening divided the declaring for the cording with always concerned with the space occupied with the piston rod at the back end of the cylinder, which should be to have at least 1/32 inch or more, 1/32 of an inch more clear at the front end of the equalizing is off. Therefore, getting the correct length of the main rod placed for the crosshead with the 1/32 inch ahead, with the center of the travel, the measuring of the center of the axle as you have it. 68. Engine drifting with the reverse lever in the center of the quadrant. When the engine is drifting with the reverse lever in the center of the nozzle of the quadrant, do the rocker arms stand perfectly still? Do they move forward, backward, a small amount, expanded in detail? Answer: you understand the lead increase with the lever that is hooked up toward the center of the quadrant, leaving the opposite open with the steam port with the piston as being of the stroke with no order. Now, in order to get any of the opening of the steam port, the valve must be first travel the distance equal to the lap. Therefore, the valve of the rocker that any of the arm would have to travel the distance with the twice the lap plus the twice the lever lever in the center of the nozzle while driving. 69. Right go ahead eccentric slip. If the go ahead eccentric slip eccentric on the right side of the slip of the following in these direction will be properly set by placing the engine in the top quarter, putting the reverse lever in the extreme forward corner, and taking out the bolt on top of the link of the clevis, and put the reverse lever in the back corner and drive the eccentric back in the so it's put on the bolt. Answer: the message is not accurately enough to recommend it wasting any time with the prior proving it while not placing any of the engine on the forward center of the lever. The full gear with the forward move of the eccentric under the steam in front of the cylinder cock, which will require less of the time. There is no chance of mistake. In case you want to set the eccentric by the position of the link of the place the engine with the forward center with the book of the reverse lever in the center notch, then tie the nut in place of the piece with the string and the fastening it to the eccentric rod bolt in the top of the link with the move of the eccentric on the axle until the string is plumbed with the bottom of the eccentric rod bolts. This will not be more satisfactory with the direction given the question. 7. The piston travel. The distance with the center of the rod pins with the center of the axle half of the piston travel. Answer: correct. Correct. Always. Crosshead travel the main rod angular. Does the crosshead travel the further with the main piston travel the one center of the quarter that does when the pin travel with the quarter is opposite of the center? If you take the compass and make a circle with the represent the crank pin to draw with a straight line through the center with extending with the horizontal line sufficient distance of representing the length of the main of the rod with extending with the compass point with the portion of the length of the main rod describing any arc through the center of the crank pin with the circle that you will find the arc through the intersect with the crank pin. Circle in front of the vertical line drawn with the center of the crank with the circle with the short main rod with the greater with the distance from will be for the vertical line. Now, if you mean the main pin in the is in on the quarter, then that is within the center of the main pin, center of the axle, and the vertical line crosshead will travel further with the quarter forward and center back with the same vertical position that would the pin move over the quarter. To the then and back and pin moved with the quarter of the back center of the back of the quarter would look up the angularity of the main rod, but it will help to make it clear to you. 72. Principles of the injector. Describe as plainly as possible the principle upon the injector works. Answer: the principle upon the injector works with the principle is induced current for the current of the kind of the tendency to induce a movement in the same direction of the body in which it is made in contact. That blower and any other steam jet may act for the same principle with a non-lifting injector. The steam does not raise the water to the injector. Water flows to it and is enforced within the boiler by steam imparting with a portion of its heat and velocity. Water given a sufficient momentum to the force into the boiler of the steam entering the injector with a high temperature with a greater velocity strike for the cold water and condensing imparts a large portion of the velocity of the water sufficient to raise the check valve and the heat into the built boiler at the high pressure lifting injector, the so-called because of the injector is usually set above the level of the water with the supply tank must raise the water with the injector as well as the force of the boiler when the steam valve with the open leaks slightly with the lever injector. The lifting valve of the injector with its type of the steam is permitted of the flow of the nozzle, directing the pass over out of the overflow of the pipe of the atmosphere, carrying with it the air of the flow from the supply pipe, thus creating the partial vacuum in the pipe with the injector and the water. Then the atmospheric pressure for the surface of water with the taking force within the supply pipe with the out of the overflow with the permeating of the injector. Then when the steam valve is open with the steam enters the injector with a much larger volume coming in contact with the water flowing through the injector, increases the velocity of the water with force and the condensing of the tube out of the injector, delivering novelization force of the inch of the brake branch pipe, like the check of the inch of the brake pipe with the steam and water flow through the injector pipe at the high speed, forming the vacuum injector supply pipe with connections, hence the importance of keeping the water them tight and free of leaks. 73. Circulation of water in the boilers. When it meant with the circulation of water, what is it meant by the circulation of water in the boilers? The free movement of the water is that they may become in contact with the heating of the surface after being converted within steam and immediately replaced with the fresh supply with the forward circulation of water is essential for the efficient operation of the boiler temp to keep all the parts with a nearly uniform temperature. Prevents overheating, and in the case of the boiler is filled with the mud and scale. The mud does not circulate within the cannot carry away the heat and sheaths at our barn. The boiler was filled with the cold water, with the water is dense within it is little, if any, circulation, but as soon as the fire is built with the firebox of the furnace, the sheets become heating. The heat is immediately absorbed by the water, crumbling in contact with them. Water rises with the temperature, becomes lighter, and rises with the surface of the cooler. Water being heavier, the flows down with the space between the flues and the boiler shell, promoting the circulation with the rapidly with the heat of the rapidity which heat was absorbed with the heating of the surface depends on the effectiveness of the circulation of the boiler. Poor circulation results in poor steamers. Alright, operating the site feed lubricator. Describe plainly, completely as possible the operation of the site feed lubricator. We'll assume that having an ordinary site feed lubricator with a condensing chamber at the top of the oil reserve of the portion between the condensing of the chamber and the oil reserve of the pipe of the passage leading with the base of the condensing chamber to near the bottom of the oil reserve of the pipe and the passage of the oil extending from the near outer side of the portion downward to the near of the bottom of the oil cup of the wrenching out of the feed valve under the side of the feed glass. When the cup is filled with the oil valve and the valves are open, the steam enters the condensing chamber. The condenser with the water flows down into the pipe with being heavier than oil. The oil is flowed over the top of the oil reserve, the fill of the passage, the site feed with the valve, the oil now, the feed with the pressure of the oil equal to the pressure of the steam of the cup and the weight of the water of the pipe of the condensing chamber, the forcing the oil through the side of the feed. The nipple of this will curve with the equalizing tube on a lubricator which stops on glass with the broken. It does not matter when the equalizing tube of the inside of the condensing chamber. The outside principle is the same. The equalizing tube of the extent of the near the top of the condensing chamber. The top of the chamber is above the side feed glass. Exert the pressure downward on the water tube, hence called the equalizing of the tube, because of the equalizer within pressure of the lubricator with the choke with the plug with a small opening with the only allows a small amount of steam to escape. The oil pipe leading of the steam shaft becomes but and carries any of the water may accumulate above the level of the choke plug in the oil pipe. Now you will readily understand why they are called the equalizing tube. They feed valve with the opening drawing the oil drop of oil will form the nipple of the side feed glass and on account it is being lighter than water. It raises the top of the water in the chamber above the side of the feed glass and carried out through the choke plug through the force into the oil pipe. But the steam of the steam of the equalizing tube when the pressure of the lubricator end of the pipe is greater than the pressure of the steam chest of the pipe. Alright, 75. Blows in the main valve cylinder package. How can you blow the main valve located, but how can you blow a cylinder package? Determine the answer. Place the engine center over the side that we wish to test the plumb the rocker arm. This will place the valve at the center of the seat. Open the cylinder cock with the throttle. The steam blows out one of both the cylinder's cock of the valve that is covering the ports. Then indicate that the valve is blowing. In the case that you find that the valve is tight, and when you want to test the cylinder packing of the valve with the right, and you want to test the cylinder packing in the back, placing the valve lever in a full clear, either the forward or back position, forward or back. This will open either the front or the back of the port leading on the cylinder. To close the cylinder cock's back, open the cylinder cock with the end of the cylinder opposite with the end of the where it's in position. Set the brake and the pen to the throttle of the steam that blows for the out of the open cylinder cock. Cylinder packing on the side with the rule of the be found without leaking in the sound of the steam and escaping through the exhaust nozzle. Stacking will assist in lubricating the cylinder packing blow with the taking off of the cylinder head with emitting the steam of the back of the cylinder and dead sure of the locomotive of the cylinder and packing blow. Alright, slipped eccentric. How would you detect a slipped eccentric? Answer, by the irregular sound of the exhaust with the eccentric of the slip of the position change of the shaft of the slip towards the pin emission occur with the too early, and if away from the pin, emissions will be delayed. When you slip an eccentric, you will have no trouble detecting it. 77. Purpose of the link. What is the purpose of the link? The purpose of the link is the reversing an engine, verifying the rate of the expansion of the cutoff, the amount of the travel communicated with the valve dependent on the distance of the line block from the center of the link. By moving the link up and down from the link block with the travel of the valve with either increase or decrease on account of the ease of which they may be handled with the engines of which is necessary to have them running backward or forward and considerably more desirable than the engine requiring reversing gear. Reversing gear. 78. Height of the smokestack. Why is it that on small locomotives they have such a small smokestack and on the large ones they have a short stack? It is in claim of the other or small locomotives have a long exhaust pipe, but the seam with the exhaust would not expand filled with the smokestack if only with an S from 24 to 26 inches. On the large locomotives we have the short exhaust pipe with the short smokestack, and then claim with the region for this due for the large pipe with the seam from the exhaust pipe exhaust with the petticoat pipe to expand and then have the smokestack. The answer for the region for the small engine having the long stack of the large engine having the small stack is the height of the stack is governed by the height of the limit of the tunnels and bridges around house. Experiments that have shown that there is nothing compensating with the length of the stack of the promoting efficiency front end, but consequently the longest stack can be SUV desirable. The range for the front end is usually based on the formula with which the diameter of the front end of the factor, so that the larger boiler with the higher nozzle of the short stack on large engines is made only on the given proper clearance, but compensated for as much as possible for the petticoat. 79. Working with the steam expansively. What is meant by working with steam expansively? Working steam expansively is the work with the dome expansive for the port for the stream of the after the valve with the clove of the port at the certain part of the stroke. Then the steam is confined with the cylinder force at the piston. The end of the stroke with the expansive force expanding with the volume of the pressure becomes less. To make clear to you that there are four terms that are used in speaking of action in the steam cylinder. When the valve closes, the port is known as cutoff. The cutoff of the regulated position with the reverse level of the exhaust. Expansion from the steam is combined with the cylinder force for the piston and end of the stroke. This is called the expansion. The valve opens for the port with escape of the steam, which is called the exhaust. The steam that does not get out of the exhaust port while the valve is open, confined with the cylinder, compressed with the piston of the return stroke. This has been emission. Then there you have the emission of expansion, exhaust, and compression. Alright, balance slide valve. What is the balance for the slide valve and the balance for the region for this hole drilled with the top of the valve and the balance slide valve with the balance for the strip of the rings placed in the back of the valve with the balance plate with the air of the valve the inside of the rings. Strips not subject to the pressure of the region of the rings of the strips of the seam type fit with the prevent the seam from exerting downward pressure from the part of the valve with the balance to produce the friction of the valve with the seam and lessen the wear of the valve gear and increase the efficiency of the engine. To the hole drilled in the top of the valve is for the escaping of any of the seam that might leak for the pass for the strip of the rings. The hole was not there for the escape of the seam of the strip of the rings, but there should be a pressure that may accumulate with the back of the valve. The balance for each of the would be lost. 81. Inside-outside emission valve blend is meant by the inside-outside emission valve. They allow surrounded by the steam the outside edge of the valve, the uncovering the ports of the emission is known as the outside emission valve. Whether the emission valve is usually made hollow in the center of the form of the spool inside the edge of the valve to cover the ports of the emission that is in the term inside emission valve. 82. Relative motion and position of the valve. What is relative motion main position valve the emission inside the emission valve, the outside emission valve. The motion of the reverse of the reason had that his outside emission valve, they open the front of the port of the valve of the rod would have to make back in the uncovered port where there is an inside emission of the valve would have to move forward to uncover the port. 83. Valve motion of the outside inside emission valve. Whether the difference of the valve motion of the outside emission valve and the inside emission valve. There is no difference other than instead of advancing eccentrics toward the pin is in the case for the outside emission valve they should be advanced away from the pin to the same angle where the indirect rocker is employed. The motion will be arranged either with the application of the direct rocker changing the position eccentric over the shaft. 84. Direct and indirect valve motion of the gear. What is the direct motion of the valve gear and with the direct motion of the valve gear? The direct motion valve is applied with the locomotive where the valve of the rev travels the same the direction eccentric rod, moving forward at the same time. Both arms in the rocker shaft are turned either down or up in any direction of the motion. Valve of the gear is the gear where the valve of the rod is travel the opposite direction with the eccentric rod. 89. Injector lubricator questions. If it's necessary for the tank of the down with the tank of the hose, how can the water be prevented from flowing on the outside of the tank of the siphon connection with the inside of the old style oil style tank valve? Answer, put the heater on the force of the water out of the siphon pipe. If they're not equipped with the vent or cock for the plugs for this purpose, usually the plug of the siphon that should be removed for the preventing the water running out of the hose and taken down. There's the cock. There should be turned up, and this will emit the air to the pipe at the front of the water from siphoning out of the tank. A. If the lubricator feeds faster with the throttle is closed open, where's the trouble? Answer, the choke plugs were worn too large, the equalizing pipe stopped. B. What is the equalizing pipe and lubricator? Answer. The equalizing tube of the lubricator for the purpose of placing the pressure on the top of the water with the side feeding seed glass with the chamber of the oil rising through the water. Reason of the buoyancy does not rise very fast on the account of the equalizing tube holding the pressure equal while the tires stop the pressure with the steam and the water in the body of the cup when the force would force the oil through the nipple of the side feed glass into the chamber of the top of the glass. There would be an pressure for the equalizing tube with the force of the oil through the choker into oil pipe at the steam chest. C. Would it be effective if the equalizing pipe became loose or broken? Answer. If the pipe was loose or broken, the benefit of condensing the chamber would be lost. D. Can explain what the engine is working slowly. Throttle valve as it becomes dry when the lubricator is apparently feeding properly. Answer. Sometimes the valve of the steam pipe of the lubricator is not open fully with the steam lubricated with the tab with a small turret and with a bell head in the air with the main valve of the opening blade and less for the combined air with the valve for other attachments would prevent the sufficient pressure for the lubricator to work with the properly at all times. The throttle is wide open with the engine working slow with the steam chest of the pressure beginning greatest oil is often from the suspension of the pipe until the throttle is closed with the steam chest and pressure of the reduced the void pockets abrupt of the bends and oil pipe. What should you do in such a case? Answer. Have the defect remedied at the shop of the position possible. To get in the would be partially closed the throttle frequently intervals let the oil with the chest of the cylinder by the part not partially closing the throttle dropping with the lever down with the revolution tube with the oil held with the suspension of the pipe with the red lead with the valve seat cylinders. F. What should be done in the case of the combining of the tube of the injector becoming obstructed? Cool the main valve of the boiler head with the take the steam of the valve of the throttle with the outer of the injector the with the wire to remove the obstruction. In most cases, this can be done very quickly. Alright, 86. Point of cutoff. The lap of the valve is 1 inch, strap of the valve is 5 inches, no leave the stroke position 24 inches. At what part of the stroke of the seam to be cut off? The answer. This depends entirely on the position of the reverse level of placing the engine of the piston and the desired part of the stroke of the move of the reverse level of the ring of the valve of the position just close the port of the cut off of the emission steam of the cylinder. You will get in the part of the stroke in which the steam will be cut off with the lever in position. For instance, in case of the desired, you make a quadrant into certain knots and say 5 inches. You would make a crosshead back and then 5 inches and the end of the stroke of the move of the lever so that the port would be closed with the mission. This would give the 5-inch cutoff of the lever the position with the portion of the lever to obtain the other of the cutoff the different from the parts of the stroke that can be determined in the same manner. 87. The tractive power and horse. When the tractive power is known as the simple engine, can the horsepower be used the same rule as with the compound? Yes. Multiple the track power of the speed by the miles per hour divided by 375. 88. Backset and rocker arms. What is the standard rocker arm backset? Answer. For the straight line engine with its call with the region for the wheel center with the cylinder setting being of the horizontal line with the center line of the motion straight rockers. Use the rocker arm with no backset. If the center of the lower rocker arm is below the line of the drawing of the center of the axle center of the cylinder, there was a backset with the rocker so that it will travel at an equal distance each side of the vertical line of the drawing with the right angle of the line of the motion. Plumb with the top of the arm of the rocker draw of the line of the center of the axle center of the locker arm of the rocker arm and give the big back set enough for the big center of the lower rocker arm at the right angles of the line of motion. 89. Automatic drain valve. How does this automatic drain valve with the motor on steam heat with a flexible joint? Answer. The automatic drain with the joint consists of a really small steel ball which is held from its seat by a spring with a tension sufficient to resist the pressure of about 15 pounds per square inch. The steam pressure exceeds the amount of the ball is forced in its seat and prevents escaping the steam of the water. Whether the steam is shut off, the pressure falls below the resistance of the spring. The ball is forced upward. And C. All condensing escape at the fretting of the freezing the burst of the joints in the pipe the period properly located with the lowest point of the piping system. End at 90. Engine out of the tram. What is meant by the engine out of the tram? Well, the difference between the two wheels, the center of the side of the engine is not equal to the distance between the wheel of the center of the corresponding wheel of the other side when the axles are not square with the line of the drum with the center of the cylinders. 91. Bypass valve. What is the bypass valve? The bypass valve is used for the simple position of the valve of the engine for the purpose of relieving the compression that becomes higher through the initial pressure located in the cage extend over the port leading with the cylinder and leave with the steam chamber between the head of the piston valve. The bypass valve is held to its seat with the pressure of the steam chamber with the forcing of its closed position. Now, if any of the cause of the pressure of the cylinder should be increased above the steam chamber, the bypass valve would be forced from the seat and the steam would be forced back into the steam chamber, relieving the cylinder head of the piston from the excessive pressure that would cause cylinder-headed piston to break the piston valve. Working with the bushing key, you can relieve the excessive compression. The same as the slide valve. The hence the necessity of the bypass valve. The relief valves are cylinder heads. The bypass valve is the engine. 92. Steam heating reducing valve. How does the steam heating reducing valve control pressure? Answer. Similar in the manner of the operation of the air pump governing the valve, controlling the opening of the regulating reducing valve. Force of the seat in the head of the head held in an open position by pressure put in on a spring above the diaphragm. The more tension put on the spring, the higher pressure will be in the train line before closing. The same pressure on the other side of the diaphragm exceed the strength of the spring with the force open, the preventing the further flow of the steam from the boiler for the heating of the system until the pressure is reduced. Certain of the kind of valve they use for the go online with the wear employer if they are unable to get one to take apart with a trace for the steam through it and wire with the manufacturer's descriptive circular, which will gladly furnish they want you to know how to handle the appliance. Always grant requests for the information. Neither disconnecting the broken steam chest. How would you disconnect the broken steam chest? Answer: it depends on the style of the chest, and the extent of the breakage. If the walls of the chest were broken, so they would be, they could be drawn together. The wood slack off the nuts on the steam chest, studs and driven wedges of nails between the studs and the edge shaft, bring the parts together. Tighten the nuts on the stand studs and proceed. This could not be done with which would you disconnect the valve, the rod, and remove the chest, blocking over the steam ports, leading of the steam with the chest, putting on the cover of the blocks, bolting it down hard on the wood blocks, tightening the nuts, but the seam of the chest studs would not be taken down by the main rod. Lubricating could be introduced for the mission of the pour of the cylinder. This to the studs roll along. We could cover the broken. Would be prepared to be towed. Do not try to put blind gaskets in the steam pipe joint. Is as impractical to do out on the road. 94. The leaky throttle with a dry pipe. How do you distinguish between a leaky throttle and a dry pipe? The answer: the leaky throttle or a dry pipe will indicate the steam is escaping with the cylinder cock when the throttle is closed. If the steam is escaping, you should be ensured the steam valve with the lubricator is closed before deciding that the throttle is leaking. The throttle is leaking, that there will be a constant flow of the dry steam through the cylinder cock. At the end of the dry pipe, if it is leaking more than less than the water, that will be fixed with the steam. Much of it depends on the position of the dry pipe in the boiler. If this should be near the boiler shell, the leaking on the upper side of the pipe of the boiler should be well filled with water before the wet steam should hold the cylinder cock for the twist of the leaky throttle first. When the steam valve of the lubricator closed for the dry steam as shown, and increase the value of the water temperature level in the boiler until the dry pipe is covered with water with the dry steam and still appear for the report of the throttle. If wet, report the dry pipe. If the dry pipe is not submerged, the location of the leak cannot be determined. 95. Priming and foaming. What is the difference between priming and foaming in the boiler? Priming is caused by the filling of the boiler too much full of water, thickening of the priming of the pump, and foaming is caused by the impurity of the water and foreign substances such as oil, soap, and anything that will cause a foam. Alright, 96. Test for the low water. Kindly answering if the answer of the too low to water is safer than the water comes in the water with a glass of the cock close to the top of the water cock, but open, one remaining open. Explain fully with the closed top of the cock and how we know how much water of the boiler when out of the side of the glass can be found with the gauge cock. As if always say if there's any safe the way of knowing the water is too low. Answer: much depends on the distance of the bottom water above the highest point of the crown. The cheap with the one is not recommended for the safe practice for the water to get slow as required for the method to certain level of the boiler. If you cannot get the water when you have one of the two gauges, for there's no assurance that will be able to get after the out of the sight with the glass. The better practice for the work of the engine so you can maintain a maximum boiler pressure water level of the trade water with the steam to get the worst of the bargain. The engineer sometimes to get in trouble of taking the change of the lower water safety of this. First consideration always do not do if no way if there's no safe way of the knowing of the water if you cannot determine the level of the gauge cock of the water gap. The reason with the water show with the glass at the top of the cock closed because of the time of the cock of the closed with the gauge with the full steam with the temperature corresponding with the pressure of the boiler. Closing the cutoff shackle of communication with the boiler at the top end of the glass of the pressure steam of the boiler will force into the bottom of the water class cock, providing the water is above the opening of the water steam and water glass and condensing the due expenditure. The lower temperature of the water is forced up into the glass. Alright, this shows a cylinder sample of the Vulcan compound locomotive. The high pressure cylinder A, B, the low pressure cylinder C, the valve chamber V, the V position valve R, the high pressure piston Q, the low pressure piston E, the steam left side of the engine branches has been saddled, ending of the chamber, the sliding, the valve bushing, and steam check of the passage is leading of the respectively in the front of the back ends of the high low pressure cylinders, passage of the leading of the exhaust pipe as steam enters through G and I, filling both of the steam chests, passing through the K and K high resistance cylinders through the J and I low pressure cylinders, then hence the exhaust passage S. Alright, 97. Broken side of the bulb with balance of the compound locomotive. We have a few bulb with balance compound locomotive that are four-wheel connected. High pressure rod with the connected with the front drive with the low pressure rod with the connected with the low back drive with the eccentric with the back of the axle. Now, if we were to break with the side rod, we were to get in the engine of the question to have come up with a considerable discussion matters. Answer the Baldwin locomotive with the company with the recommended with the K for the kind with the high pressure cylinder connected with the front axle with the low pressure cylinder with the second driving axle with the eccentric being on the second axle. Side rod brakes on the end of the engine with the type of the high pressure piston rod should be removed with the engine out upon the low pressure cylinders under the condition shall run with a single big expansion engine with the high pressure cylinders merely serve with the steam chest with lower cylinder pressure cylinders, low pressure cylinders. Or 98, the relation between the valve and the link. Will you kindly explain the relation between the valve and the link? The valve travel as far over the lever looked up at the valve full stroke. How is the supply of steam cut off? Some of the is cut off at the exhaust cavity. Answer: the forward motion eccentric connection with the top of the link with the back motion eccentric with the bottom of the link with the eccentrics are set with the axle position with the steam with the direction of the steam of the cylinders cut off the engine to move in either direction. The link with the bottom of the link being connected with the lower rocker arm to remain stationary respective of the rocker with the butt link can be raised. Or by the reverse level of the top link ship of the link of the hangers now, etc. Now when their level is the full gear with either in the forward or the back with back motion, the eccentric rod is the opposite of the link of the block with the move of the eccentric rod with the movement given in the rocker transmitted to the valve with this given the full travel of the valve with the full gear with the steam. The minute during the stroke of the piston, the travel of the valve is to open the steam port fully with the cannot be less than twice the width of the steam port, twice the lap of the valve. If the engine with the steam ports of 1 5/8 of an inch, if the lap of the valve with the 7/8 of an inch, to get the full port opening, you would have to give the valve the travel of 1 5/8 of an inch plus 7/8 of an inch times 2. The 5 inches but the locomotive has been slightly over traveled. The supply of the steam is cut off with the valve closing the port with the piston in certain portion of the stroke. In the event of the port is not fully open, we will see say the steam was cut off with the valve closing the port with the piston has been moved with the 7 inch of the stroke. We have also maximum port opening 1/4 inch of the course of the lever would be the hooked up with the give of the cut off. We would have the valve with the travel of the opening plus with the lap of the valve of times 2 equals 2 1/4 inch when the inches. When the lever has been hooked up with the raised link with the link block with the near of the center of the link and inside with the forward motion eccentric imparting with the motion of the rocker arm, it is received in its motion from both eccentric with the compound motion with the decreased travel of the value. The outside edge of the steam port for the edge of the value cut off of the emission for the inside edge of the steam port edge of the exhaust and cavity of the valve cut off of the exhaust possibly, but this was brought to the discussion. Alright, 99, angularity of the main rod. Please explain what is meant by the angularity of the main rod. The reader understands that the crank of the pin with the forward center of the crosshead, the reach for the extreme travel of the forward, and the piston is on the back center of the crosshead has reach for the extreme back of the travel. It's placed crossed in the mid-stroke with the distance of the center of the wristing pin with the crosshead at the center of the axle and length of the main rod. Now that you would draw the circle around the axle representing the crank of the pin circle with a radius equal to the length of the main rod described as an arc, as you will find in that would pass for the center of the axle and the intersect with the crank pin circle in the front of the line directly drawn vertically through the center of the axle. This also applied with the outside of the diameter of the water the wheel, measuring the distance with the water wheel travel to the mid position with the crosshead forward to the center, back to the middle position. We find that is much less, and then middle position to back center with the forward, the middle position to the angularity of the main rod. The angularity increase for the short, decrease for the main rod, hence for the term of the angularity of the main rod. 100. Determining the side of the exhaust nozzle. When pleased to state that how the side of the exhaust nozzles is determined would be the proper side of the nozzle of a 17 by 24 inch cylinder locomotive. Answer: practically determine the running of large with the nozzle tip consistent with the steam making with the quality of the fuel. We do not know any of the rules would be applicable to all the engine classes service, but you can usually figure out the nozzle containing as many square inches of air. If the cylinder, the diameter alterations will be in slight. If the engine is properly drafted, however, the good condition, do not push the nozzles until you have failed to get steam by all the other means. All locomotives having 17 inches in diameter should run in the tip within the area. 17 inches 4 5/8 of an inch diameter, 18 inches 4 7/8 inch diameter, 19 5 inches an inch diameter, 25 1/8 of an inch diameter, 21 inches 5 1/4 inches diameter, 22 5 5/16 of an inch diameter. What is a fairly good coil and liberal heating surfaces? Alright, 101 to 150 will be on the next tape.